The first thing I saw was the hem. Not the whole dress. Not the room. Just the hem. A jagged line of torn silk pooling off the edge of the guest room bed, like something had tried to bite through it and lost patience halfway. Then came the bodice. Slashed lace. Beading ripped loose. One strap hanging by a thread. A wine-dark stain blooming across the front panel. So wide and ugly it looked deliberate even before I noticed the scissors on the carpet. I remember not screaming. That surprised me later. People like to imagine that when your wedding dress is destroyed the night before your ceremony, you collapse dramatically to the floor or clutch your chest or start sobbing into your hands. I didn't. I stood there in the doorway of my mother's house with my overnight bag still hanging from one shoulder and felt my whole body go perfectly, terrifyingly still. There are certain forms of betrayal so intimate that your nervous system does not register them first as pain. It registers them as proof. Proof that the thing you feared was real all along. Proof that the person everyone told you to be patient with finally stopped pretending. And on that Friday night, looking at my ruined dress under the yellow light of the bedside lamp, I knew exactly who had done it. My stepsister, Ava. No hesitation. No mystery. No dramatic whodunit. Just certainty. Because no one else in my life had spent 15 years turning envy into performance art. Before I tell you what I wore instead, like this video and subscribe. But only if this story resonates with you. Because some women do not try to take your place by becoming better than you. They try to ruin the moment, so no one can tell the difference. My name is Eliza Hart. And the night before my wedding, my stepsister destroyed the dress I had dreamed about since I was 14. By the next afternoon, she was the one fighting not to cry in public. To understand why, you need to know what Ava was like long before she touched the dress. She was 2 years older than me, and had been competing with me before either of us had the language for what competition was. We met when I was 9 and she was 11. At the exact moment, our parents decided to mistake attraction for compatibility and call it a blended family. My father had married her mother, Denise, 14 months after my own mother died. I do not say that to invite sympathy. It is just a fact. And facts explain architecture, especially family architecture. My mother died of ovarian cancer in late October. By Christmas, the casseroles had stopped coming. By February, my father had begun smiling at his phone. By the following December, Denise and Ava were moving into our house with monogrammed bath towels and a Labrador that hated me on sight. People use the phrase blended family as if it describes a recipe. As if there is a bowl and enough stirring, and eventually all the ingredients become one thing. That was never our house. Our house was layers. My grief on the bottom. My father's avoidance over that. Denise's social ambition over both. And Ava on top of everything. Learning fast that if she was charming enough in public and wounded enough in private, adults would hand her whatever narrative she wanted. She was beautiful in the way that gets rewarded early. Bright blonde hair, fast smile, dainty features that made every expression look more innocent than it was. Teachers adored her. My father called her spirited. Denise called her sensitive. Men called her unforgettable by the time she was 16. I called her exhausting by the time I was 12. She had a gift for small sabotage. Borrowing clothes and returning them stretched. Accidentally deleting school documents. Retelling my private moments in public with just enough concern to sound caring. If I got a compliment, she found a way to stand beside it until some of the light hit her too. If I got a gift, she found a reason why hers should have been the same or better. If I got hurt, she got louder. And because she rarely broke rules in ways adults could easily classify, she built a reputation as the misunderstood one. Emotional, intense, needing reassurance, which meant the rest of us were always expected to flex around her. Especially me. I was the easier daughter. The calm one. The one teachers trusted with attendance sheets and group projects. The one who made her own breakfast. The one who learned by 13 that if she kept her room clean, her grades high, and her emotions orderly, she could move through the house with less friction. Reliability is a dangerous trait in girls. Families stop praising it and start budgeting around it. Ava, meanwhile, specialized in turbulence. At 14, she cried for 2 days because my father bought me my mother's old pearl earrings for a school banquet instead of giving her something equally sentimental. At 16, she flirted with the boy I liked until he asked her to prom. Then dumped him 3 weeks later because, and I quote, winning was the fun part. At 19, she announced over Easter dinner that I was so lucky to get my mother's old cedar hope chest because she herself had never had a dead parent to inherit from. Denise laughed nervously. My father told us both to stop. And I remember sitting there staring at my plate and realizing, not for the last time, that in our family, the person who struck the match was never treated as the fire hazard. Only the person who named the smoke. By the time we were adults, Ava had refined her methods. She no longer stole attention through tantrums. She stole it through storyline. Every event became a stage where she could be either the sparkling center or the strangely injured near center. At college graduation, she cried because her stole color clashed with her skin tone. At Denise's 40th birthday dinner, she announced halfway through dessert that her ex had emotionally ghosted her and let the entire table pivot toward comforting her. At my promotion party, she got tipsy and told 3 guests she was worried I worked too hard because women like Eliza often think achievement replaces softness. Women like Eliza. That was her favorite phrasing. Not because it meant anything specific. Because it let her criticize me while sounding anthropological. By 28, I had built a life that looked neat from the outside and hard-earned from the inside. I worked as a brand strategist for a boutique design agency in Raleigh. I rented a brick duplex with good windows and terrible insulation. I had 2 close friends, a decent savings account, and the sort of quiet routines people overlook because no one films them. Farmers market Saturdays, laundry on Sundays, candles in the evening, stacks of books half read on my coffee table. Stability that belonged entirely to me. And then I met Owen. It happened at a friend's engagement dinner where I was seated beside a man in a navy sweater who knew how to ask questions without treating curiosity like a performance. He worked in urban planning, loved old neighborhoods, wore wire-rimmed glasses only when he was tired, and had the sort of laugh that made you feel cleverer just for causing it. We talked about cities, public spaces, and the strange loneliness of being good at life on paper while still feeling like you were waiting for your actual life to begin. 3 dates in, he told me he liked that I never embellished stories to make myself more interesting. I said, that might be the least romantic compliment I've ever gotten. He smiled. It's one of the highest ones I know. He was kind, steady, unimpressed by performance. That alone made him dangerous in Ava's orbit. The first time she met him was at Denise's Christmas brunch. I had barely hung up my coat before she appeared in the doorway wearing cream cashmere and a smile like sharpened sugar. So this is Owen, she said, and hugged him as if she had known him for years. I watched the exchange the way bomb technicians probably watch suspicious wires. Not because Owen encouraged it. He didn't. He was warm but brief, then turned back to me when he spoke. That mattered. I noticed. Ava noticed too. Later, while arranging pastries on a platter no one had asked her to touch, she leaned toward me and murmured, "He's handsome, less polished than your usual type. Though, good thing he's mine." Then, she laughed softly. That laugh, the one that said the game had begun, Owen learned quickly. By the second family gathering, he had identified Ava's rhythm almost perfectly. The teasing that was never quite teasing. The personal observations dressed as insight. The way she complimented women only after establishing herself as their reference point. When we left Denise's house that night, he said, very carefully, "Your stepsister seems used to every room bending a little toward her." I looked at him in surprise. "Yes," I said, "that is exactly it." He reached for my hand across the center console. "You don't bend much." I almost laughed. Only because I've spent years resenting how much I used to. He proposed 16 months later on a windswept overlook outside Asheville after a weekend cabin trip where we had spent most of the time cooking badly, hiking slowly, and talking in the kind of long, unstructured way that makes the future feel less theoretical. There was no photographer hiding in the trees. No rose petals. Just Owen in a wool coat with nervous hands and a ring box that took him 2 attempts to open because his fingers were cold. I said yes before he finished asking. By the time we drove back to Raleigh, there were congratulations from my friends. 1 emotional voicemail from Denise. And 3 texts from Ava. The first, "Oh my God, finally." The second, "Can't believe you beat me to it. Rude." The third, "Kidding. Mostly. Show me the ring." That mostly was pure Ava. A joke with a real tooth inside it. At first, though, she behaved better than expected. That should have made me more suspicious than it did. She offered to host a bridal brunch, sent me venue ideas, acted invested but not intrusive, supportive but not theatrical. Even Owen commented on it one night while we were addressing Save the Dates. "She seems nice lately." I looked up from the stack of envelopes and said, "That just means she's waiting for a more expensive moment." He thought I was joking. I wish I had been. Wedding planning revealed the usual fault lines and some new ones. Denise wanted a larger guest list than our budget supported. My father kept offering vague financial help tied to no actual number. Ava volunteered for things I had not asked her to do, then acted hurt when I redirected them. She wanted input on centerpieces, bridesmaid dresses, even the signature cocktail names, which would have been funny if it were not so consistent with her larger disease. She did not want the wedding. She wanted a portion of authorship. I set boundaries early. No, she would not be maid of honor. That was Simone, my best friend since college, who had earned the role by showing up repeatedly in actual life and not just in photographs. No, Ava would not give a speech. No, she would not help style my bridal look. No, she would not wear champagne, because only the bride would wear anything in that tonal family. Each no cost me more social energy than it should have, because with Ava, boundaries were never interpreted as preferences. They were treated as accusations. She would purse her lips, tilt her head, and say things like, "Wow, I was only trying to be involved. Or, you really don't trust me, do you? In exactly the tone designed to make bystanders view firmness as cruelty. Denise always took her side softly. Girls, she would say, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. That phrase should be carved onto the tombstone of every woman who was ever asked to accept disrespect so the room could stay comfortable. My father, predictably, did worse. He became neutral. Men love neutrality when the conflict benefits them indirectly. At our family dinner, the month before the wedding, Ava announced that it was kind of hilarious. I was choosing such a classic dress because she had always assumed I'd go more severe. Denise told her not to be rude. Ava said she was complimenting me. My father carved chicken and stared at his plate. Later, in the kitchen while I wrapped leftovers into foil, he said, "You know how Ava is?" I turned and looked at him. Yes, I did. That was the problem. My dress was the one uncomplicated joy in the whole planning process. I found it in a boutique in Chapel Hill with Simone and my cousin Mara. On a rain-heavy Thursday afternoon, when I was already exhausted from venue spreadsheets and relatives treating guest lists like treaty negotiations. The boutique smelled like steamed fabric and gardenia. The consultant brought me 3 gowns I disliked politely, and one I still think about the way some people think about first kisses or old houses. Ivory silk satin, structured bodice, soft off-the-shoulder drape, narrow waist, clean lines through the skirt, then a gentle flare. No glitter, no excessive lace, no fake princess nonsense. When I stepped onto the pedestal and saw myself in the mirror, I didn't feel transformed into someone more bridal. I felt like the sharpest, most luminous version of myself. That mattered. Because weddings tend to encourage women to disappear into symbolism. Bride as softness, bride as fantasy, bride as event object. This dress did the opposite. It made me look present. I bought it that day. Paid for it myself. Had it fitted in 2 appointments. And when I brought it home, I stored it in a garment bag in my hall closet like something sacred and slightly unreal. Ava asked for photos. I sent one carefully chosen image. Her reply came 30 seconds later. Wow, that's very you. Again, if you speak fluent Ava, you know exactly how much venom fits into 3 dots. Still, nothing overt happened for weeks. The shower came and went. The rehearsal schedule was set. My work friends planned a dinner. Owen and I moved through those final pre-wedding days in the dazed logistical haze all couples know. Calls, seating chart adjustments, suit pickup, favor boxes, last-minute RSVPs from people who believe calendars are theoretical suggestions. Through all of it, I held on to one simple comfort. Once the wedding was over, Ava's role in it would end. That was what I thought. The ceremony was set for a Saturday afternoon in early May at a restored estate outside Raleigh. Garden vows. Reception under a sailcloth tent. Live quartet for the ceremony. Soul band for the reception. Elegant but warm. Formal without being stiff. The kind of wedding Owen and I actually wanted. The night before, I slept at my father's house because the bridal party was getting ready there the next morning before heading to the venue. I had not wanted to. Every instinct in me preferred a hotel suite far away from family dynamics and memory-heavy hallways. But Denise had insisted it would be special to have everyone under one roof. My father said it meant a lot to him. And Owen, trying to be supportive, said, "One night, then we're done." One night, That is how women end up in terrible stories. I arrived Friday around 6 with my dress bag. Overnight case. Shoes. Jewelry pouch. Emergency kit. And a level of tension I tried to pass off as normal bridal nerves. Denise had lit candles downstairs that smelled like vanilla and fig. There were platters in the kitchen. Music playing softly. And enough staged warmth in the house to qualify as a hostage environment. Ava floated in 20 minutes after me, wearing linen pants and no bra, and kissed the air beside my cheek. "Bride energy?" she said. "How are we feeling?" "Like leaving." I thought. "Fine," I said. She eyed the garment bag in my hand. "Can I see it in person?" "No." The answer came too fast to be polite. Her smile thinned. "Relax. I'm not going to curse it. You'd have to believe in consequences first." She laughed as if I had made a joke. That is another thing people like Ava do when you tell the truth. They convert it to wit, so the room doesn't have to deal with the content. I carried the dress upstairs myself and hung it in the guest room closet. Zipped high inside the bag. Away from steam and food and candles and everyone else's fingers. Then I checked on it twice before bed. Yes, twice. Call it paranoia? I call it pattern recognition. Dinner was strained in the way special family dinners often are when one person is trying to manufacture intimacy and another is trying not to set anything on fire. Denise made salmon. My father opened wine. Ava talked too much about a man she was sort of seeing, who sounded less like a boyfriend than a tax bracket with stubble. She asked Owen, who had come by briefly to drop off a note and say goodnight, whether he was nervous marrying into so much female intensity. Owen smiled tightly and said, "I'm marrying Eliza. Simple. Clean. Perfect." Ava drank more after he left. Not sloppy. Strategic. By 9:30, Denise was fussing over breakfast plans for the next morning. My father was pretending everything felt festive. I escaped upstairs with the excuse of wanting proper sleep. The note Owen had dropped off was waiting in my makeup bag where he had hidden it earlier. Tomorrow. No matter what the weather does. I'll be the lucky one. Sleep if you can. I love you. I read it twice and felt my chest soften. That note saved something in me later. I changed into an old t-shirt and silk shorts. Washed my face. Set my phone on the bedside table. And walked into the guest room one more time just to look at the dress before sleeping. Still there. Still perfect. Still mean. I remember touching the zipper of the garment bag lightly like a ritual and thinking, just get through tomorrow morning. The house quieted around 11. A door closing down the hall. Water running in the pipes. Denise's laugh once. Faintly. Then silence. I slept badly. Of course I did. Weddings do that even without sabotage. I woke at 1:13 to use the bathroom. At 2:48, because the Labrador downstairs barked once in its sleep. At 4:30, because I dreamed I had forgotten my vows, even though we weren't writing any. At 5:56, I gave up on sleep entirely and reached for my phone. A text from Simone. "UP?" I replied. Barely alive. She sent back a photo of coffee and said she was on her way. I smiled. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft. Then faster. Then a door. I sat up fully. Listening. For 1 second, I told myself it was nothing. Denise starting breakfast. My father looking for coffee. Old houses make more theater of ordinary sounds than new ones do. Still, something in my stomach tightened. I pulled on a robe and stepped into the hall. No one there. The guest room door, though, was slightly open. That door had been closed when I went to bed. I know it had. That kind of knowing doesn't come from memory alone. It comes from vigilance. From living near people whose damage always arrives with plausible deniability. I crossed the hallway and pushed the door open. And there it was. The hem. The torn silk. The stain. The scissors on the carpet and scattered around the floor like confetti from hell. Tiny pearls from the beaded edge I had added at the waist in the final fitting. I didn't scream. I turned, walked straight to Ava's bedroom, and opened the door without knocking. She was in bed in a cropped sleep tank. Hair messy, phone on the pillow beside her. The lamp was still on. Still on. That detail mattered too. Her eyes flew open in a way that told me before she said anything that she had not been sleeping deeply enough to claim innocence convincingly. "What?" she snapped. I stepped fully into the room. You know what? Her face arranged itself. Confusion first. Offense second. It was almost impressive how quickly she worked. "Elisa, what are you talking about?" "My dress." She blinked, then sat up. "What about it?" I could have slapped her. Instead, I held her gaze and said, "If you want to lie, at least stand up first." The insult landed. "Good." She threw the blanket aside and stood. "I have no idea what you're accusing me of." That's when Denise appeared in the hallway in her robe, followed seconds later by my father. Bleary and useless. "What is going on?" Denise demanded. I turned toward them. "My dress has been destroyed." Silence. Then all three of them started moving at once. Ava toward outrage. Denise toward panic. My father toward the room. Because men like him always hope facts will somehow soften, if viewed from another angle. We stood in the guest room doorway together, looking at the wreckage. Denise actually gasped. My father said, "Jesus." Ava, behind us, said, "Oh my God." Too perfectly, too quickly, and with just enough horror to sound rehearsed. I turned on her immediately. "Stop." She recoiled. "What?" "Stop acting surprised." Denise spun around. "Elisa." "What?" I said. "Who else did this? The dog? A raccoon with access to Merlot and fabric shears?" Ava's mouth fell open, then filled with tears. "Of course. Right on cue. I cannot believe you would think I'd do something this sick." And there it was. The pivot, not defensive facts. Attack on tone. I walked to the nightstand by the bed and held up the scissors from the floor. Denise said my name in warning. My father rubbed both hands over his face. Ava cried harder. "I was asleep," she said. "You're insane." Insane. Interesting word choice. Not wrong. Not mistaken. Insane. I stared at her for a long moment and felt something cold and stable take hold inside me. Because there are moments when the lie itself no longer matters. Only the audience does. And I could see it already. Denise preparing to mediate. My father preparing to postpone reality until after the wedding. Ava, preparing to turn my certainty into further evidence of how cruel and suspicious I was. So I did not argue longer. I set the scissors down, took one slow breath, and said, "Fine." Ava blinked through her tears. "What?" I looked at my father. "Get a garbage bag." "Eliza," Denise started. "No." I said, "Calm now. Don't worry about it. I understand exactly what kind of mourning this is." That confused all of them more than screaming would have. Good. Confusion is useful when people expect collapse. I walked back into the room, unzipped the garment bag fully, and inspected the damage with the detached precision of a coroner. The skirt had been sliced in 3 places. Red wine or something close to it had been poured directly over the bodice front. The off-the-shoulder drape had been hacked unevenly. This was not one panicked snip. This was indulgent. Enjoyed. Ava had spent time with it. That knowledge should have shattered me. Instead, it clarified. Because if she had spent that much effort destroying it, then she had expected one thing in return. Me ruin. My tears. My frantic calls. A delayed ceremony. A broken bride. A story that would belong to her forever. I was suddenly, fiercely unwilling to give her that. By 6 to 10, Simone arrived with coffee, and one look at my face was enough. What happened? I just stepped aside so she could see. She said one word. Not loud. Not elegant. Perfect. Oh. Hell. Then she turned to Ava in the hallway and, to her eternal credit, did not even pretend diplomacy. You did this? Ava crossed her arms. I absolutely did not. Simone looked at me. I looked back. No words needed. She understood the dynamics in one glance. Had. For years. What's the plan? She asked. That question saved the day. Not who did it. Not are you okay? What's the plan? Because grief without plan turns into spectacle. And I was not going to be spectacle for Ava. I looked down at the dress one more time. Then at my phone. Then at the hope chest sitting against the wall under the window. My mother's cedar, hope chest. The one my father had let me keep when Denise moved in because even he knew some lines should not be crossed. Though in fairness, his understanding of that principle was wildly inconsistent. Inside that chest were things I rarely touched. Letters. A cashmere blanket. My mother's perfume bottle. Empty for years. And one garment bag I had not opened in nearly a decade. For a second, I only stared at it. Simone followed my gaze. Then her face changed. Hey, Lisa, she said slowly. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking? I was. And the moment I admitted it to myself, the whole shape of the day shifted. My mother's wedding dress, not preserved as some untouched museum relic, but carefully boxed after her death with tissue paper and notes in my grandmother's handwriting. It had never fit me exactly. It had belonged to a different era. Ivory silk with long fitted sleeves, hand-sewn pearl buttons, and a neckline modern enough to feel uncanny now that vintage had circled back around. We had once taken it out when I was 14, and I had cried into the skirt because it still smelled faintly. Impossibly. Like her. I had not planned to wear it. Not because I didn't love it. Because it felt too loaded. Too sacred. too tied to loss rather than beginning. But standing there in that wrecked room with Ava's performance still drying in the air, I suddenly understood something. Sacred things are not always too fragile to use. Sometimes they are exactly what a thief can't compete with. I knelt by the hope chest and opened it. The cedar smell rose immediately. Memory, in wood form. Sharp. Clean. A little sweet. Inside, beneath the folded blanket and tissue paper, was the garment bag. My hands shook for the first time that morning. Not from fear. From recognition. I unzipped it slowly. And there it was. My mother's dress. Ivory. Not bright white. Elegant. Quiet. Strong. Still beautiful. Still waiting. Behind me, I heard Denise inhale. My father said my name like a warning and a prayer at once. Ava said nothing. That told me more than any denial had. She knew, in that second, that the story was slipping. Because she had attacked the dress. She had not prepared for lineage. For grace. For a room full of people seeing me walk in wearing something she could never imitate or trivialize. I stood and held the dress up against me. It fit better than memory said it would. Not perfectly, but enough. And enough is a holy word when the alternative is surrender. Simone whispered, "Oh my God." This time, it sounded like awe. I looked at myself in the mirror. At the long sleeves, the old pearl buttons, the way the ivory softened my face, the way grief and love and fury and inheritance seemed to stand up together inside the fabric. And right there, in my father's house, with the ruined dress behind me and my stepsister watching from the hall, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I turned to Simone. "Call Mara," I said. "Tell her, bring her emergency sewing kit and the pearl hair comb." Then to my father, "You're driving me to the venue in 45 minutes. Elisa," Denise began, still trying to locate the center of the room and make herself it. "We need to talk about what happened." I looked straight at her. "No, you need to live with what happened. I need to get married." Ava's face changed then. Finally. Just a flicker. But enough. Because for the first time all morning, she looked uncertain. "Good. Lydia." Ava's uncertainty lasted less than 3 seconds. Then she did what people like her always do when a plan fails. She tried to reclaim the story with concern. "Elisa," she said, crossing her arms tighter over herself. "That dress is ancient. You can't seriously be thinking of wearing that." Ancien. Not sentimental. Not beautiful. Ancien. Interesting choice. I looked at her in the mirror. My mother's dress was draped over my arms, the ivory silk catching the weak gray morning light from the guest room window. The long sleeves hung straight. The fitted waist still held shape. Time had softened the fabric just enough to make it move like water. "No," I said calmly. "I'm not thinking about it." Ava blinked. "I'm doing it." That landed. I watched it land. Not publicly yet, not with the force it would have later, but privately, in that ugly hallway at dawn. I watched the first crack appear in her confidence, because she had not destroyed my wedding dress to damage fabric. She had done it to destroy momentum, to replace my joy with chaos, to make me frantic, Late, puffy-eyed, unstable, and humiliated. And if I walked down that aisle in my mother's dress looking more composed than ever, then what Ava had really done was hand me a better story than the one I had planned. She saw that too. That was the beginning of her regret. Mara arrived at 6:31 with her sewing kit. A travel steamer, extra garment tape, and the kind of grim competence I have always trusted more than affection. She was my mother's niece, older than me by 6 years, and one of the few people in the family who had never once confused politeness with virtue. Simone met her at the door and filled her in fast. By the time Mara came upstairs, she already looked ready to commit a minor felony on my behalf. "She did this?" was the first thing she asked, looking toward Ava's room. "Yes." Ava, from the hallway, called out. I was asleep. Mara didn't even turn. "Then rest up," she said. "It's going to be a long day." I nearly smiled. We moved quickly after that. Not frantically. Purposefully. That distinction matters. There is power in refusing the tempo sabotage tries to force on you. Mara steamed the old dress in the bathroom, with the shower running hot to ease the storage creases. Simone laid out shoes, jewelry, and backup pins like a field medic preparing instruments. I sat at the vanity while Denise fluttered at the doorway, trying to insert herself into usefulness and failing. "I really think we should call the boutique," she said. "The ceremony is at 2. I replied. "No boutique is fixing this in time." "What about delaying?" "No." "Elisa, sweetheart, don't," I said. She stopped, because my tone had changed. Not louder. Done. I had spent most of my life modulating myself around women like Denise. Softening, clarifying, making things easier to swallow so they would not choke on the truth. But by then, with my mother's dress hanging in steam and Ava still pretending in the next room, I had no appetite left for digestibility. My father hovered uselessly for another 10 minutes before finally asking whether there was anything practical he could do. "Yes," I said. "Find out whether the venue has a basic sewing kit, a garment rack, and a full-length mirror in the bridal suite. Then make sure my car is brought around by 7:15. And don't let Ava come near my things again." He looked stung. Good. Men like my father have survived on low expectations for years. A little sting is often the closest they come to instruction. He nodded and left. Through all of this, Ava kept performing innocence in waves. A quiet sniffle in the hall. A stunned expression if anyone looked at her too directly. One attempt to enter the guest room with, "I just want to help if I can," which Simone shut down with such cold efficiency I still think about it fondly. "You can help by staying visible," Simone said. "That way no one has to wonder where you are." Ava flushed hard. Again. Good. By 7 o'clock. My mother's dress was pressed, aired, and hanging from the bathroom door. I stepped into it with Mara's help. The fabric was cool against my skin, heavier than modern bridal silk. More structure through the bodice. Pearl buttons all the way from wrist to elbow and down the back. The sleeves fit almost perfectly. The waist was close enough to breathe in. The neckline sat like a promise I had not known. I still wanted to keep. When Mara fastened the final button and I turned toward the mirror, the room went quiet. Not because everyone suddenly became sentimental, because the dress was stunning. That is one thing I need people to understand. This was not a pity solution. Not a desperate substitute. Not good considering. It was breathtaking. Ivory rather than bridal white, which made my skin look warmer. Clean vintage lines that felt richer and more intentional than anything trendy. A silhouette elegant enough to look timeless and unusual at once. I looked less like a conventional bride and more like a woman walking straight out of a family archive with unfinished business. Denise covered her mouth. "Oh," she said softly. For once, the word contained no poison. My father, standing in the doorway behind her, stared at me with a face I could not fully read. Grief, pride, shame, recognition, maybe all of it, maybe none. Men who avoid feeling for years often look almost stunned when it finally arrives all at once. "You look like your mother," he said. I met his eyes in the mirror. "No," I said. "I look like myself." That was important. Because women are too often praised only in resemblance. Pretty like your mother. Strong like your grandmother. Graceful like your aunt. As if our highest compliment is always proximity to an earlier woman and not our own completed form. I loved my mother. But that morning I was not interested in becoming a ghost. I was interested in becoming unruinable. Ava had gone silent by then. When I turned, I saw her standing in the hallway, one hand on the banister, looking at me with an expression that was almost impossible to mistake. Not guilt. Not yet. Loss. Because she had imagined herself the author of a disaster. And instead, she was watching me step into something she could never manufacture for herself. Legacy. Grace. Emotional weight. The kind of beauty that comes attached to meaning rather than mere effect. That kind of thing drives envious people feral. She tried one last time. "It's a little old-fashioned," she said weakly. Mara looked at her. "So is arson," she replied. Simone choked on a laugh. I did smile then. Only briefly. Enough to feel the steel in it. By 7:40, we were in motion. Hair and makeup had to shift to the venue instead of the house, which caused stress for everyone except me. The planner called twice. The florist once. The quartet manager texted a question about timing. Denise tried to spin the new logistics into an exciting story about family heirloom magic and serendipity, which I shut down immediately. "No," I said while fastening my earrings in the car mirror. "This is not serendipity. Someone tried to ruin my wedding." She looked at me in the passenger seat as if I had slapped her. I was long past caring. Because that is another thing about weddings and families and female sabotage. People rush to redeem a painful story before the injured person has even had time to own it. They want inspiration, resilience, a tearful silver lining, anything but the raw shape of the harm, because if they acknowledge the harm properly, then they may have to acknowledge who protected it, who ignored it, who made excuses for it, and who was allowed to keep smiling through years of smaller rehearsal versions. The venue was the Hawthorne Estate, a restored 19th century property with magnolia trees, long lawns, pale stone paths, and a white-columned main house that looked expensive without trying too hard. Owen and I had chosen it because it felt elegant but alive. Less ballroom, more inherited light. The bridal suite sat on the second floor overlooking the garden ceremony space. When I arrived just after 8, the room was already full of florists, stylists, makeup brushes, garment bags, and one terrified planner named Celine, who took one look at me in my mother's dress and forgot all the questions she had clearly been preparing. "You look incredible," she whispered. I believed her. And belief, that morning, was fuel. We made one immediate decision. No one outside the bridal suite would know about the destroyed dress until after the ceremony. Not vendors. Not guests. Not Owen. Especially not Ava. Because the story was still loading, and I wanted her to stand there all afternoon not knowing whether she had succeeded or failed until the answer became public. That was not petty. That was architecture. The right revenge in family stories is rarely loud punishment. It is controlled timing. Celine adjusted fast once she saw I was composed. Hairpinned. Makeup softened to suit the dress. My bouquet revised slightly when I asked them to remove one of the more modern ribbon wraps and keep it cleaner. Less fussy. Someone fetched my mother's pearl comb from the emergency kit. Mara sewed a tiny hidden reinforcement in the waist seam in under 4 minutes. Simone kept all unnecessary people away from me, with the efficiency of a nightclub bouncer in a satin slip dress. Around 10:30, Owen sent a text. "How's my bride?" I stared at the message for a long second. My bride. The phrase almost undid me. Not because I doubted him. I didn't. Owen was the one uncomplicated thing in the whole structure. That mattered. He was not the villain in this story, which made it all the harder that he had to spend the first half of the day in ignorance, while I decided how much truth the ceremony itself could bear. I typed back. "Running on caffeine and spite. See you soon." He replied with a laughing emoji and a heart. Good. Let him think it was ordinary bridal nerves. I needed one part of the day to remain clean until the right moment. At 11, Denise asked to speak with me alone. I almost refused. Then I said yes. Because some conversations rot if they are postponed too long. She followed me into the smaller sitting room off the suite and closed the door behind her. Her face was pale in a way I had never seen before. Not socially pale. Actually pale. "I know you think Ava did this," she said. I looked at her. "I don't think it." She winced. "Even if she did, there are sentences that reveal a woman's entire moral architecture in 4 words. Even if she did? Not if she did. Even if. As if the likely guilt were already survivable compared to the social discomfort of naming it. "Stop," I said. She swallowed. "I'm only saying the wedding is today. Maybe this isn't the time to make permanent family damage out of something we can discuss privately tomorrow." Private. Tomorrow. Damage. All the usual false gods. I stood very still. "Denise?" I said. "You are talking to the wrong daughter in the wrong dress on the wrong day?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Again?" "Not my problem. I have covered for her my entire life." I continued. "You have covered for her my entire life. Dad has hidden inside silence my entire life. If today creates permanent damage, it won't be because I finally say what happened. It will be because all of you taught her there would never be a cost." She sat down hard on the edge of the settee. For a second, she looked older than I had ever allowed myself to see her. Not glamorous, not polished, just tired. Tired in the way women become when they spend decades managing one child's volatility by sacrificing another child's peace. I didn't know how bad it had gotten. She whispered. I believed that and blamed her anyway. Those two things can coexist. That's because it never cost you what it cost me, I said. Then I opened the door and ended the conversation. By noon, the guests were arriving. You can always tell when a wedding begins to fill by the change in air outside the bridal windows. Cars, laughter drifting upward, door slams, the occasional burst of music from set-up crews, men in suits walking too quickly because they never think shoes matter until the event itself. Women in summer dresses pretending not to inspect one another while doing exactly that. I stood at the window for a moment with my bouquet and watched people take their seats under the white chairs in the garden. The quartet was tuning. The hydrangeas at the aisle ends looked soft and expensive in the midday light. Everything was ready. I should have been nervous then. Instead, I felt clear. Not because I knew every outcome, because I knew my own center. Ava, however, was unraveling in stages. The first sign came when she entered the bridal suite an hour before the ceremony in the pale blue bridesmaid dress we had all agreed on months earlier. She stopped dead when she saw me fully finished. Hair pinned low. Pearl combs set. My mother's dress fitted and glowing in the filtered light. For a second, she said nothing at all. No snide comment. No fake enthusiasm. Nothing. Then, where's the original dress? I adjusted one gloveless sleeve and said, "Not your concern?" Her mouth tightened. "You're really doing this?" There are so many answers I could have given. Instead, I chose the one that would stay under her skin longest. "Yes," I said, "and now you get to watch." She actually blanched. That was the moment I knew. Not just that she had done it, that she had done it expecting total control of the narrative afterward. She thought I would call off the ceremony, or spend the day crying, or, at minimum, disclose the sabotage in a way that centered her as scandal. She had never once imagined I might convert the wound into something larger than her. People who live for emotional dominance rarely understand symbolic defeat until it is standing in front of them in pearl buttons. The ceremony began at 2. The walk from the house to the garden path was shaded by old trees and lined with staff pretending not to stare. The sun was bright but not punishing. There was a faint breeze. Good weather. In other words, the kind every aunt later describes as a blessing. The quartet shifted into the processional. The bridesmaids began walking. Ava was second from last before me, which meant she had to move down that aisle knowing exactly what was coming behind her and being powerless to stop it. That pleased me more than I can properly explain. I waited at the garden gate with my father. He looked at me in the old dress and took a shaky breath. "Your mother would have loved this," he said. I held the bouquet tighter. "She would have hated the reason." His head dipped slightly. "Good. Let him carry that." Because men like my father are often granted soft redemption arcs simply for crying at the right ceremony. I had no interest in granting one that cheaply. When the cue came, the coordinator nodded, the gate opened, and I stepped into the aisle. The effect was immediate. I heard it before I fully saw it. That low collective sound crowds make when they encounter something unexpected and beautiful at once. Not quite a gasp. Not words. A ripple of human recognition. Faces turned. Then changed. Guests who had seen the modern dress sketch at the shower blinked in surprise. Older relatives straightened. My Aunt Laura actually put a hand to her chest. Someone in the third row whispered, "That's her mother's dress," which meant the story was already beginning to write itself without my help. Good. Owen, waiting under the floral arch, looked stunned, then overwhelmed. then openly emotional in a way I had only seen once before. When we found out his youngest niece's surgery had gone well, his mouth parted slightly, his eyes shone, one hand tightened at his side. Not because the dress was dramatic, because he understood, in one instant, that this meant something larger than style. When I reached him, he leaned down just enough to whisper, "You're unbelievable." There are many ways for a bride to receive that sentence. I chose the best one. "No," I whispered back, "just impossible to ruin." His eyes searched mine. "Question, concern, love, timing." I gave the smallest shake of my head. "Later." He understood. That is what a good man does when the woman he loves signals timing over panic. He waits without making it about his need to know. The ceremony itself was beautiful. That part is important too, because Ava did not deserve to take that from me. The vows were simple and exact. The breeze lifted the edge of the aisle, florals just enough to make them seem alive. Somewhere in the distance, a bird made noise at precisely the wrong solemn moment, and people smiled softly. Owen's hands were warm when he took mine. Mine were steady, and the entire time, from her place in the bridal party to one side, Ava had to stand there watching me become more radiant under the weight of what she had tried to destroy. That was punishment already. Public, elegant, irreversible. At the reception, though, came the part that made her regret it forever. Not because I screamed, not because I exposed her in the middle of dinner with a dramatic toast and shattered glasses and security escort theater. That would have been too easy, too cinematic, too generous. In a way, it would have let her become the exciting villain. I wanted something worse. I wanted clarity. After cocktail hour, once dinner had begun and the first 2 courses had gone out, I asked Celine to make one discreet change to the schedule. Instead of opening the dance floor immediately after the best man's speech, we would do one additional toast. Mine. Not unusual for the bride to speak, just unexpected enough to command attention. Celine hesitated only a second, then nodded. "Do you want a mic?" "Yes." By then, Owen knew enough to trust me completely and ask for explanations later. That trust was one of the reasons I married him. The speeches ended. Laughter rolled through the tent. Glassware clinked. Candles lit the tables in soft gold. The band paused. Celine stepped up and announced that before the first dance, the bride wanted to say a few words. There was polite applause. I stood, lifted the mic, and looked around the room. My father at table 3, Denise beside him, already tense, Ava across from them, one hand frozen around her wine glass, Mara watching me like she knew exactly what blade I was about to draw, Simone nearly smiling in advance. Then I said this. "I've been thinking all day about what it means to show up for someone you love." The room quieted. Not in theory, not in photo ops, not in speeches, but in the moments when love becomes inconvenient, expensive, easy to damage. Now Ava's face had gone perfectly still. I continued. "This morning, something happened that could have ruined this wedding. A dress was destroyed, deliberately. There it was. The air changed instantly. Notre chaos. Attention. The useful kind. A murmur started and died. No one looked away. I kept my eyes moving across the room, not settling on Ava yet. But what I learned today, I said, is that people who try to destroy what matters to you usually misunderstand where the power was in the first place. A beat. Then I touched the sleeve of my mother's dress. Softly, visible to everyone. They think it's in the fabric, the object, the event, the appearance. They don't understand that the real power is in what survives them. You could have heard a fork drop. I saw realization moving through table after table. The older relatives first, then the friends. Then the people who had enough history with our family to begin linking timeline to character. Ava's hand tightened around the stem of her glass so hard I thought it might snap. Now I looked at her directly. Not angrily. That would have lowered the tone. Just clearly. So tonight, I said, I want to thank everyone who showed up with love instead of competition, with protection instead of envy, with memory instead of sabotage. That was the killing line. Because I never said her name. I did not need to. Rooms, no. Especially family rooms. Especially when one woman begins sweating under perfect makeup. Denise's face emptied out. My father stared at the tablecloth. Mara, God bless her, raised her glass first. To what survives, she said. Others followed. Ona be ona. Then all at once. To what survives? The whole tent echoed it. And Ava sat there trapped inside the only punishment that ever truly works on people like her. Recognition. Not just mine. Everyone's. After that, the rest unraveled fast. Two of Denise's friends went pale and stopped speaking to Ava entirely. My Aunt Laura quietly asked Mara, was it really her? And Mara answered, who else would need this much attention? Which traveled. I later learned, with shocking efficiency around 3 tables and 1 dessert course. Owen's sister, Nathalie, who had only met my family a handful of times, but possessed the priceless gift of instant pattern detection, leaned over to me during coffee and said, I don't need details to know you're handling this better than I would. That felt like sisterhood. Late in the evening, Ava tried to leave early. That was perhaps my favorite part. Because leaving early is what people do when the room they expected to manipulate begins holding shape without them. She had her clutch in one hand, phone in the other, face rigid with the effort of maintaining dignity, while social gravity abandoned her in real time. Denise followed her toward the parking area. My father half rose, then sat back down again when he realized this was not one more moment he could outsource to female management. I watched from the edge of the dance floor while Owen danced with my grandmother. I did not stop Ava. I did not need to. But she stopped herself. Halfway to the lot, she turned. Maybe she thought I would chase her. Maybe she thought I'd want a screaming confrontation under string lights. Maybe she still believed she was the emotional center of my life. Instead, I just looked at her. Calm. Married. Untouched where it counted. And because she could not stand that, she came toward me. What did you do? She hissed when she got close enough. Voice low and furious. I tilted my head. I got married. You humiliated me. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not I didn't do it. Not how could you accuse me. You humiliated me. The true language finally arriving. I smiled very slightly. No. I said, you did that this morning? I just refused to wear it for you. Her face broke then. Not in tears exactly. In comprehension, because she realized, all at once, that I had taken the one thing she always used as leverage and rendered it useless. Spectacle. I had survived it better. Used it cleaner. Turned it into meaning instead of mess. That is unforgivable to people who only know how to win through contamination. She left without another word. Denise followed 10 seconds later, looking hollowed out in a way that almost made me pity her. Almost. Because mothers like Denise always imagine the cost of indulgence will one day be payable in softer currency. A difficult daughter eventually settling. A family learning to move around her damage forever. They never imagine the bill will come due under wedding lights with witnesses and silverware and public memory attached. After the honeymoon, the fallout continued. Ava denied everything. Naturally. But denial decays when it lacks audience. The venue cleaner found wine residue and fabric fibers in the upstairs hall trash bag back at the house after the wedding. Not enough for court. Plenty for family. One of Denise's neighbors later mentioned seeing Ava on the back patio at dawn with red wine in a tumbler, even though no one else was awake. Simone remembered the scissors on the floor had come from Denise's downstairs wrapping drawer, where Ava regularly pulled odds and ends for crafts and gift tags. Again, not a police case. A pattern case. And families, for all their talent at denial, are actually excellent at pattern recognition once the social permission to notice has finally been granted. My father called me a week after the honeymoon and asked if I truly believed Ava had done it. I let the silence stretch long enough to sting. Dad, I said, if you still need me to prove this, then you were never listening in the first place. He cried. I wish that moved me more than it did. Some grief arrives too late to feel redemptive. Still, he changed after that. Not overnight. Not theatrically. But in ways I count more than apologies. He stopped defending her by habit. He stopped using neutral language for targeted harm. When Denise tried to minimize things over Thanksgiving, he said, "No, Eliza's been absorbing this for years." It was the most useful sentence he had spoken in our family in over a decade. Denise and I never fully recovered. We found a civil distance. Nothing warmer. I think part of her resented me for naming out loud what she had spent years managing through euphemism. Another part of her, perhaps the truest part, resented herself. Ava spiraled for a while after the wedding. There were social media posts about betrayal with no names attached, which told me more than any confession would have. A breakup, a move, a brief attempt at reinventing herself as a lifestyle influencer based on elevated authenticity, which remains one of the funniest phrases I have ever encountered in the wild. But the real punishment was subtler than public embarrassment. No one trusted her around meaningful things anymore. Not baby showers. Not graduations. Not engagement party. Not confidential conversations. Not heirlooms. Not dresses. And for someone whose whole identity depended on proximity to other people's moments, that exile was total. As for me, I kept my mother's dress. Of course I did. After the wedding, I had it professionally cleaned and preserved, but not boxed away forever. Once a year I take it out, not to relive the sabotage, to remember the reversal, the way a woman can inherit more than beauty from the ones who came before her. She can inherit timing, backbone, tusta, refusal. Sometimes people still ask why I didn't expose Ava more directly. Why I didn't call the police? Why I didn't throw her out publicly before the ceremony or announce her guilt by name over dinner? The answer is simple. Because I know her. Ava has spent her entire life converting conflict into fuel. Had I screamed, she would have screamed louder. Had I named her in full, she would have cried harder. Had I collapsed, she would have fed on the collapse for years. What I gave her instead was far more durable. A room full of people drawing the correct conclusion without her being important enough to deserve a full scene. That is the kind of regret that lingers. Not because it is dramatic, because it is inescapable. She cannot retell that day as my breakdown. She cannot spin herself as the misunderstood center of a giant emotional rupture. All roads lead back to the same image. Me, in my mother's dress, radiant, here, in the audience of her own failure. That image did more work than revenge speeches ever could. And Owen? He learned the full story the night of the wedding. After the guests had gone, and we were finally alone in the suite with our shoes off and the silence of aftermath settling around us. He listened without interrupting, then sat on the floor in front of me, hands around mine, and said something I have never forgotten. She went after the dress because she couldn't imagine touching what actually makes you, you. That was it exactly. Envy is often that stupid. It attacks the visible symbol and misses the deeper source entirely. We've been married 6 years now. Long enough to know the difference between a beautiful day and a solid life. We bought a house with crooked floors and too many hydrangeas. Owen still leaves notes in places I don't expect. I still save them. We host Thanksgiving at our place now. And Ava is not invited. Neither is ambiguity. That may be the healthiest thing I learned from the entire ordeal. Not vengeance. Not resilience. Selection. You do not have to keep giving front row seats to people who only show up, hoping the stage catches fire. So if you are the easy daughter, the composed sister, the one who has spent years surviving someone else's emotional vandalism because everyone around you preferred a quiet victim to a difficult truth, hear me. You are not imagining the pattern. You are not cruel for naming it. And when the day comes that they finally push too far, you do not owe them a mess. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is become so unmistakably yourself that their sabotage makes you brighter by accident. My stepsister destroyed my wedding dress the night before my wedding. What I wore instead was lineage, memory, proof. And the sight of me walking toward the altar in it made her understand something she had been avoiding her whole life. She could damage fabric. She could not touch meaning. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to Revenge Story Vault. And if you've ever had someone mistake your calm for weakness, leave the word enough in the comments. Because sometimes the most permanent revenge is not destroying the person who tried to ruin you. Sometimes it is letting them watch. In real time. As you become the part of the story they can never rewrite.